The biggest lesson I have ever learned about life was from a dog. Some of you might be thinking, what? Isn't that the role of a good teacher? What about role models growing up or mentors as a young child? You see, sometimes your lessons may come from those unexpected teachers, from the events in your life that you have no control over. Today, I'm going to share with you how this happened in my life. And at the end of this talk, you'll have an understanding and insight as to how a dog can influence and lead a person from darkness to their inner harmony, they're finding their peace and emotional freedom. My name is Saunders, and I have dedicated my life to understanding dogs, people, and the relationships that we share. And yes, just to point out what might be obvious to some, I can see the irony of being called Cat when my life involves working alongside dogs. Let me take you back to what I now know was my future, waiting for me to realize it. Let's go back to 2017. I was working in an animal shelter, working with dogs, helping people, living what I thought was my dream. I had just finished up for the day. All of the dogs had been fed. They'd been put to bed for the night. I locked up and I walked out to the car park. I jumped in my car and I shut that door. No different to the thousands of other times that I'd done this previously. Only this time, I was ambushed. Not by another person, not by someone wielding a weapon, but I was ambushed by heavy emotions that stole my breath and any spark of happiness that I had within. Now, ambush is a pretty strong word, but that's what it was. I never saw them coming until they were already upon me, and I was drowning in the darkness. It didn't make sense. I know the massive impact that I was having and the work that I was doing, helping. It was helping. And in the weeks leading up to this day when my light was taken so quickly and I found myself in the dark, I did have to say a final goodbye to a dog that I'd built a special bond with. And whilst I've held the head, a paw, or even sat on the floor with a dog in my lap as I've said goodbye to some beautiful dogs in my life, what made this day different? Why on this day? Why on a day when nothing bad or nothing sad had happened? Was this so different and so dark so quickly? It was a trigger of events. You see, this dog that I had been working with came to me from pretty terrible circumstances. I worked with him daily to build his trust. It took 2 weeks for me to be able to be in the same enclosure without a fence between us, protecting me from his intent and aggressive advances toward me. And I did it. He went from growling and throwing himself at the dog run from the moment he heard me approaching from 15 meters away, to a dog that was excited to see me, with soft body postures, like a jelly belly, with nothing but excitement and love all over his face. My days and weeks were dedicated with how I could serve and help this dog when others had failed him so atrociously. And I'd done it. This dog that was displaying some aggressive behavior based on his prior experience and extreme fear, now he trusted me. He looked forward to seeing me and hanging out together. I was so happy and proud of what we had done together, how he had responded, and the trust that we held and built within each other. Then the pivotal moment that shifted the axis of my world and began what was one of the greatest shifts in my life occurred. The triggers of emotional flashbacks. The emotional flashbacks of things I couldn't remember, or they just didn't make sense. For reasons this dog could not control. for reasons I could not control. Despite all of my attempts, he didn't make it out of the system or free himself of the demons from his past I fought so hard to free him from. I knew I gave it my all. I left nothing on the field. I did my best. I did everything I could. But I knew as I sat in the car that day, this was more than just the sadness and grief for a dog that the system had failed. I knew that this was more than the anger I was feeling for the people that had created what unfolded for this dog, which, if it had been a sliding door moment, may have been a completely different ending. This was different, it was deeper, it was darker, and I was beyond broken. The light had gone out from within, and I didn't even see it flicker or fade. It was like a blackout, 1 minute light, and then the next all-consuming darkness. So how on earth did I get here? How did I get to this point? I'm a dog lover, an advocate. I always have been. Growing up, even my best friend was a dog. There's not a memory I have as a child that doesn't have a dog in it somehow or somewhere. I should have been so happy and grateful to be working every day with dogs and to be making a difference. But here I was, sitting in the car, depleted of any joy in what I dedicated my life to. It was my heart and my soul's work. As a child, I would sing to my dogs. Many weekends were spent at dog shows. Our family dogs were even on a television lifestyle show. My mum reminds me of a close family friend's dog that I got to know and love as a child. His name was Domino the Dalmatian. And my mum and I get a giggle when she reminds me of how upset I was one day because I thought his spots were falling off. Domino was an entire male dog. They were not spots. I grew up with a British bulldog called Sammy. She was my best friend. I would read her my school reader. I would play the recorder. I trusted her like no other. I told her the woes a young child could have. I mean, she understood me and I understood her. If my parents were ever bad, in the context of not letting me have my own way, like eating ice cream for breakfast, I would run away. And they would never have to look far because I would always be in the kennel with Sammy. When I was 6 years old, I remember sitting with Sammy and I was rubbing her belly when it was time to leave for school. I promised Sammy that when I get home, I would rub her belly and give her love. That's what we used to call it. I would give her love for at least an hour, and that I would read her my reader and I would play my recorder for her. And for any parent that has a child learning to play the recorder, you'll join me when I say, poor bloody dog. I didn't know it at the time, but that promise would define many of my choices and impact my life for over 3 decades moving forward. You see, whilst I was at school that day I made that promise, Sammy passed away. And that promise I made to her was broken. Broken in a way I couldn't fix it. It was out of my control. So unknowingly, I spent years, decades of my life, making decisions, trying to fulfill a 6-year-old's promise of love to her dog. To pop this into context, this was my first experience where, in all of my 6 years of wisdom, I connected the fact that love hurts. From my experience at the time, as a 6-year-old, I thought deep and true love must have to hurt, as this was my first experience of the beauty and the power of unconditional love. It had to hurt to be real and undoubtedly always led to heartache and another unfulfilled, impossible, broken promise. There it was, all laid out in front of me, my roadmap for love and relationships. So you can imagine as a young woman what my early relationships may have been like. You may be asking, how does all this link together? What does sitting in my car, dealing with the aftermath of the ambush that was paralyzing me with its wave of negative emotions, where at 39 years old, have to do with a 6-year-old's broken promise to a dog? I had no idea at the time either. But I did know about dog behavior and how to help them emotionally. So I knew I had to learn more about my own behavior and mindset so that I could help myself. This was my sliding door moment to choose a different future than the one being dictated to me by my past. And it was during this journey, through the symptoms I was experiencing of the physical pain, the fog, the emotional flashbacks, the lack of sleep, the nightmares, the extreme sadness. That's when I discovered that emotions don't necessarily understand the concept of time, especially when it comes to negative emotions that haven't yet been resolved. I discovered that the unconscious mind doesn't understand the concept of time, especially when it comes to those negative emotions. And it doesn't understand it from a logical point of view, based on what I experienced, that love doesn't have to hurt. Our unconscious mind isn't logical in what it learns from your experience. So all those years, all that time had passed. 33 years of time. 33 years of my life, unconsciously. I was still trying to keep that promise I made at 6 years of age to my best friend, my dog, Sammy. Unknowingly, I kept seeking out the same type of environments and situations where I may be able to rectify that broken promise, so I could love that dog for at least 1 hour more, just like my promise, all unconsciously. I was repeating the same patterns of behavior, putting myself in similar environments, the same conversations, seeking resolution and peace. Still trying to save that dog just so I could love her as I promised for just 1 more hour. It was through my research and personal journey that I learned that my lifetime of work dedicated to helping dogs was the result of the hurt and sadness endured by this little 6-year-old girl losing her dog, me losing my Sammy. My 6-year-old self running the show, running my life as she tried so desperately to keep that promise. What an amazing little girl. But that's a lot of pressure and responsibility for a 6-year-old to have to bear. What these 2 dogs taught me, Sammy and the dog I worked with within the shelter, was how to love at a level words simply cannot embody. They taught me what joy is all about. They taught me more about compassion and humanity than ever taught in a classroom. What they didn't teach me was how to find emotional resolution from the past. I had to do that one on my own. I had to allow the 6-year-old girl to heal the emotions so that she could move forward. I had to allow her to trust and realize that the impossible broken promise and giving up the illusion of control doesn't mean you'll automatically experience that same level of pain, hurt, loss, or grief that she once experienced. So then and only then could my real journey begin. A journey free from the darkness and the shadows that would continue to follow me until I did the work. I had to take responsibility. I had to take the ownership for that. I had to choose to and be prepared to drag myself out of the emotional trenches. Through the thick, murky, emotional storm that was all my own. To truly claim my happiness and own that joy that dogs have taught me. To embrace it with all the compassion that we each deserve. And it takes compassion, especially when you realize and you acknowledge that it took me 33 years of relationships that ended in broken promises, 33 years unconsciously believing that the love I experienced always came with heartache before I began to figure this stuff out for myself. So I ask you these questions. What shadows are hiding in the darkness of your unconscious mind as you try so hard to live in the light? How are you possibly self-sabotaging your joy and your happiness unconsciously, trying to resolve a broken promise or trauma from your past without even knowing it? It's only when we have the courage to explore our darkness and find our shadows that we empower ourselves to do something about it. Then we can shine the light on it, shine the light on our own life. I found my way out of the trenches. I climbed my way out. It's the least I could do in the legacy of all the dogs and the people that I know that I have helped. I found the emotional freedom from the emotional stresses that a 6-year-old experienced by the breaking of a promise that was beyond her control to her best friend. And as a result of allowing this emotional unleashing of the past pain and hurt, and it wasn't serving me, have I been able to fall in love, a kind and caring and powerful love where I'm free from hurt, free from guilt and the anger from the past. And yep, as a result of doing the work and finding my freedom, I am now married to an amazing guy who has also dedicated his life to the well-being of dogs. And he understands why I am now equally as passionate about dogs as I am to helping the people that love them like I do with their emotional journey. Love doesn't have to hurt. And about that broken promise, that is now the gift. That is very much a part of my legacy and what I do and what I will leave behind. A broken promise from the past doesn't have to dictate a broken future.